Well, for more on US-UK relations, I'm joined by John Allison. He's chairman and CEO of Unio Capital. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachelle. Pleased to be there.
Now, John, we heard a lot about the amount of trade between the US and the UK, but they were rather light on details about where they go from here. What should we take from that?
Well, this is to be expected. These kinds of sessions are primarily feel-good sessions, and Jessica, your reporter, mentioned the bust of Winston Churchill in the background, and the continuity of the special relationship, and also, Donald Trump, the billionaire, getting along with Mrs. May, the vicar's daughter, and so on and so forth. So the complexity of what they're talking about when it comes to trade or NATO or anything else, it just doesn't ever fit into something like this. So it was entirely as expected.
Now, John, from the US perspective, how realistic is it to negotiate these trade deals with the UK when Article 50 to trigger Brexit hasn't even happened yet?
Well, I think it's a very good question, actually, and I think it is possible, but unlikely that a very limited kind of bilateral deal could be done with the U.S. while Brexit is being dealt with. But just to put this in perspective, if New York State decided to secede from the United States and it was thinking about a trade deal with Canada, the complexity of its dealing with the rest of the United States and all the trade deals around the world would overwhelm its desire to have a bilateral trade deal with Canada. It's the same thing with Britain. It's a very, very complex undertaking, and bilateral deals will come slowly and in small chunks.
Certainly an interesting comparison there. Now, you also have Donald Trump with his America First policies, and then you have Theresa May, really a proponent of globalization and free trade deals. How do you think Brexit plays into the bargaining positions of both countries?
Well, it's another very good question. Donald Trump is a deal maker, and he wants a deal no matter what. So that's sort of his perspective. Theresa May is very interested in globalization because if Britain is to make a success of Brexit, it needs to have a very broad-based set of global trade deals, including with the EU, which it wants to have. So in a certain sense, from that perspective, there's no contradiction. At the same time, I would say to you that though Donald Trump talks about America first, he, as time goes on, is a very intelligent man, and he is going to see that these global trade deals that we already have are going to be very, very difficult to undo in any meaningful way. So I think Britain and the U.S. will come closer together on that matter as well.
And speaking of coming together, we saw that both leaders affirmed their support for NATO. Now, that's an organization that Trump had previously criticized. How does that relationship between the two countries and NATO influence their trade relations?
Well, I think, my view is that they're going to keep trade and defense separate, except for very minor things like trade deals that may have to do with defense procurement and that kind of thing. But basically, from that press conference, it was pretty clear, as your reporter also said, that President Trump supported NATO. Obviously, Mrs. May supports NATO, and they looked at the defense and security issues of NATO and didn't link them with trade. And I expect that that is something that's going to follow, that they will keep them separate and focus on what is the reform agenda for NATO and nothing to do really with any trade connection with NATO.
Now, John, there were also a lot of concerns about how much of a role US businesses would have in Britain's public services, especially its National Health Service. How do you see that playing out?
That was a pretty interesting comment that Prime Minister May said when she talked about U.S. companies possibly having a trade relationship with the UK and helping with healthcare in the UK. I think it was sort of one of those brainstorming ideas. She was at pains to say that the British public will always get a free National Health Service offering. But I think what she was also trying to imply is that Britain needs to reform its healthcare. And the U.S. actually is the leading healthcare service provider in the world at every level in terms of products, in terms of services. So it's a kind of interesting idea to connect the U.S. a little bit more closely with the reform of British healthcare, as long as the British don't have to pay at the point of service. I think that's what she was trying to do, but it's very, very early days.
All right, we'll have to see how that progresses. Thank you so much to John Allison, Chairman and CEO of Unio Capital.